Well, welcome everybody to the first of what I hope will be many sociology and anthropology graduate alumni panels where we invite our former students to come back and tell us what they've been doing with the knowledge that they've picked up while they were students here. My name is Pamela Stern. I am the Chair of Graduate Studies in Sociology and Anthropology. I want to let you know that we are recording this event. Though attendees will not be visible on the video. I'd like to acknowledge that SFU sits on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the MacEwan, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish. We're all in many different places, and many of us are also sitting on unceded and Indigenous land. I'd like to thank the Dean of Graduate and Postgraduate Studies for the financial support that's made this event possible. We have 4 panelists today, 2 anthropologists, Andrea Steigerwald Rodgers and Lindsay Simpson, and 2 sociologists, Alexandra Rodgers and Meagan Simon. I've asked the panelists to speak for about 8 minutes and to tell us a little bit about the work that they are doing currently, and then anything else that they think would be useful for students who are studying sociology and anthropology about moving from the MA into the world of work. The order of speaking will be Andrea first, followed by Alexandra, followed by Lindsay, and then last will be Meagan. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. If you have any questions that you would like to ask any or all of the panelists, you can click on that Q&A button and write them, and we'll have some time for questions and answers after that, at the end of the presentations. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Andrea Steigerwald Rodgers, who is a research associate at Pacific Research and Evaluation in Portland, Oregon.
Hi, everyone. As Pam mentioned, my name's Andrea. Really good to be here today, calling in from Portland. I'm going to just share my screen here so you all can see some slides. All right, and can everyone see those okay? Can our panelists just nod at me? Okay, great, wonderful. All right, and I'm just going to start my timer here to make sure that we don't go too over on time. So I'm working as a program evaluator, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what program evaluation is. But firstly, I graduated from Simon Fraser in 2018 with an MA in anthropology. And my research primarily involved spending a couple months in Bolivia, in La Paz, where I worked with feminist nonprofits and social movements. And since then, I've moved into a position as a research associate for a small research firm named Pacific Research and Evaluation. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I'm applying my MA. Firstly, what is program evaluation? So evaluation is essentially what it sounds like. It's evaluating programs. We primarily look at education programs. So a lot of universities and colleges, for example, will receive grants, usually federally funded, and they're required to have someone come in as an external evaluator to be able to talk about what is going well with the program, how the program can be improved. So we kind of act as a collaborator alongside the people that are implementing these programs to help them understand the success of their program and areas of growth. You can do program evaluation in all kinds of fields like public health. Education is a big one, but evaluation is a really big field, but think of it as a type of applied research. And so my role in the everyday is to be a project manager. So I have about 5 to 10 projects that I'm working on. So I work with a lot of community colleges here in the US. And the everyday involves a lot of methods that you all are probably familiar with. So interviews, focus groups, surveys, report writing, that's a lot of the job that I do. I really enjoy it because it applies a lot of the skills that I learned during my MA. Specifically, I use a lot of qualitative data analysis. So I look at open-ended survey data, interview data, focus group data. I sometimes do translation for Spanish, English, and coding themes. This was huge when I did my research in Bolivia and came back and had to write my thesis. So being able to have those skills to look at a large amount of qualitative data and summarize it into a report for a client is something I use all the time. I can't emphasize enough people skills and how important that is. It's one thing to be a really good hardcore researcher. It's another to really be able to relate to people. I think sociologists and anthropologists are really well suited to this kind of work because relationships are so important to the work that we do and the research that we do. We're very attentive to power dynamics and thinking about our research participants as experts in the work that they do. I think that that comes quite intuitively to a sociologist and anthropologist, but isn't necessarily always part of the field of applied research. So I think that's been a real advantage that I've had, is the way that I approach people and just taking a real strengths-based approach. I do a lot of facilitating and presenting. So again, in focus groups, panel discussions, we like to do presenting our results to our stakeholders and asking them what resonates with their experience. We do a lot of proposal writing, which is another skill I learned as an MA. So designing a research plan, being able to talk about the so what, why does your research matter? This is really huge, especially in a world where in order to be paid, I need to be able to bring in contracts and projects for the work that I do. So being able to talk about the importance of research is really important. Writing skills are huge. And again, like I was saying, elevating all the voices and asking that question, who is missing from the table? Who have we not heard from? That's a skill I learned during my MA at SFU. So some buzzwords that come up a lot in evaluation that I think, again, tie back to sociology and anthropology really well are this idea of culturally responsive research or evaluation. So again, being attentive to the different ways that culture plays into the programs and the research that you're doing, thinking about your role as an evaluator and your positionality, and also how to make sure that you're listening to all stakeholders. A lot of the programs are focused on equity or might be focused on a specific population, such as the Latinx population. So being able to talk about what it means to be culturally responsive is huge. And I think, again, anthropologists and sociologists are set up well to do that. I also often in job applications, in proposals, talk about community-based participatory research. People who are looking to award a project to an evaluator are often really interested in a participatory method. So being able, and with that I mean that you're in ongoing communication with them. You're not just presenting findings at the end and saying, here you go, here's the findings of our research, but you're including them as a collaborator throughout the whole process. And again, that's something when I did my ethnography, it was a very collaborative process. So that set me up well for doing the kind of work that I do. Data visualization is also a really big word. So thinking about like fancy charts and graphs, but also thinking about infographics, presentations, all kinds of ways that you can present data in a way that's accessible. So I would really recommend, as you're thinking about maybe doing a research project for your MA, how are you going to be presenting the data back to your stakeholders and making it accessible to them? Because a lot of people don't really want to read like a 30-page, 40-page report. So being able to think about that in creative ways, I think is a really useful skill and something you can definitely learn during your MA or as an undergrad as well. And then using mixed methods as well. So next I want to talk a little bit about, and this is just a quote about culturally responsive evaluation and essentially how it's really important. And you almost, it's saying basically that you can't do good evaluation without being attentive to culture, which is again intuitive to us, I think. So in terms of something that I wish I had known, I wish that I had expanded my toolkit when I was an MA. So I did do a lot of the interviews, the focus groups, that kind of thing, but I had the opportunity to do surveys and I didn't do it when I was working with the nonprofit. It didn't come to mind as a tool that would be actually really helpful. So I would highly recommend, as you think about doing research and equipping yourself for the job world, these are skills that are super employable. If you know how to work with data collection tools like we use Alchemy, which is Survey Gizmo, all the time. Google surveys. If you know how to work with data analysis tools, it's huge. So Excel, doing pivot tables, SPSS for statistical analysis. R is an online free platform that you can learn to code and create reports. And I see that come up all the time as something that they're looking for. So these, again, are skills that you could use to analyze your data and then have that be something you put on a job application. And then, like I mentioned before, data visualization tools are also really great. I recommend looking at Canva. That's what I created this PowerPoint with. It's a great tool for creating infographics and that kind of thing as well. So just to be attentive to time, I'll wrap up. Here's some resources that I recommend if you're interested in evaluation. There is a Canadian Evaluation Society that you can look into with the BC chapter. You can look up the American Evaluation Association, has a lot of different resources, as well as the Equitable Evaluation Initiative. It's really interesting. They're trying to steer evaluation towards being more equitable. And then I listed some ways that you could learn some of these free tools. And lastly, if you're interested about evaluation in your local context, there's a famous Canadian evaluation celebrity that whenever people find out I'm Canadian, they always ask me about this person. So Kylie Hutchinson, look her up. She's based in Vancouver Island. If you're interested in evaluation, she's doing a lot of really cool stuff. Anyway, that's me. I want to make sure we have time for everyone else. So looking forward to your questions, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Andrea. And next, we'll hear from Alexandra Rodgers, who is the Director of Policy for the Ontario Ministry of Labour Training and Skills Development.
Hi, thanks very much for the introduction and the opportunity to be here today. Yeah, I'm just going to be mindful of time also here. Yeah, so in terms of my trajectory after my master's in sociology at SFU, I would actually say my career or what I wanted to do for a career maybe began at the same time I was doing my master's. So I was working under the supervision of Dr. Kendra Strauss, which was a really incredible opportunity. And my master's thesis was looking at the temporary foreign worker program and unfree labor and specific changes that could be made in policy with the Employment Standards Act. And that put me in contact with people who were doing that work on the ground. And so I joined an organization and a campaign through what was then the West Coast Domestic Workers Association and is now the Migrant Workers Center. And we did collaborative policy work where there were lawyers and researchers and different policy people involved. And it made me realize that I really, really like that collaboration, and whatever it was that we were doing to try, and eventually we were successful and had a bill put in place to regulate recruiters, but it made me realize that kind of collaborative policy work was what I enjoyed and what I wanted to do in some form. So I didn't have a clear sense of what I wanted to do after my master's, but I knew what I liked. And then I had an opportunity to work as a principal investigator on a project funded by the Law Foundation of BC and overseen through Natalie Drolet and the Migrant Workers Center. And doing that research gave me this opportunity to, once I had done the on-the-ground research, I could write the report from anywhere. And I had this idea that Toronto's great and there's policy work in Toronto, so I'm going to go and write the report there and then find a job in policy. And that was challenging. And I think that made me realize that it's hard to bridge that gap and to not be connected to an institution or to have a network in a city that you're moving to. So it was a process where I, through a series of obstacles, eventually found a position as a research and policy analyst at an industry association. And yeah, it was a really interesting environment. I was working for the Tourism Industry Association of Toronto, or of Ontario, based in Toronto. I had this opportunity to use skill sets that I had developed in my master's, and then try and connect that to the work that you do in an industry association, which I think I kind of learned as I was going, and eventually realized that you're taking the issues of your membership and connecting those issues to broader public policy conversations, and then taking that to government and trying to work on solutions. And so I think it was an opportunity for me to kind of see where my strengths were and where they weren't. And I had a really great mentor there with my boss who, didn't push me to be great at government relations, and kind of let me just be like, why don't we talk about affordable housing and the Planning Act and inclusionary zoning, because we employ all of these people who are renters and it's part of the labor shortage. So it was this like interesting opportunity to make that transition from academic research to working in the private sector. And then most recently, in August, I joined Minister McNaughton's office. So I have this incredible opportunity now to work as the Director of Policy to the Minister of Labor, Training and Skills Development. And that's been, this incredible thing. What I was doing with the original, like a group of policy people working on things and sharing strengths and capacities, is essentially what I'm doing now. So it wasn't a clear path, but it was through following my curiosity and trying to lean into the strengths I did have and figure out where I needed to refine. I was able to get to this position. And I think the skills that I learned in my master's that I use all the time, I would say really similar to what Andrea highlighted with relationships. I think that being able to understand not only policy, but how it interacts with other people is a huge one. And really technical things, like I know Dr. Kathleen Millar was highlighted that I had really passive writing when I started, and I went to the Graduate Research Center and used the resources there to try and fix that. And I think my writing skills are a huge benefit in policy work. And I think working under Dr. Kendra Strauss was huge, because I understood that sociology is also connected to political economy and economic geography, and there's these really practical and pragmatic ways of looking at a policy issue, and I think that serves me really well in the work I do now, and also just being able to recognize how to talk to subject matter experts and get the information that you need from them, and having a sense of humility, and it's all right to be uncomfortable and to need to get information quickly in your work and not necessarily be the subject matter expert. And I think that was a great skill that I learned throughout the master's. And just being mindful of time. I think what I wish I had known before I went in, I wish I had known, which maybe it's impossible to know, I wish I'd known I didn't want to do a PhD, and that's not the only way to be successful at the end of a master's. And I wish I'd realized how key building relationships are, and that academic institutions can sometimes be like either a gateway or a gatekeeper to work. And if you don't want to go on to a PhD, maybe learn that you don't want to do that earlier than I did, and then use and leverage the institution you're in to try and get into work that you want to do, because it's pretty challenging to do that after the fact. And it obviously you can do it, but it I think is a great resource. There's a lot of public policy schools that set their students up to go into work, and I think I thought of that as like, oh, we're here in academia and this is something totally separate, and I wish that I'd kind of clued into that sooner. And then post studies that I've done, when I moved to Toronto, I was really panicked that I was competing against people from U of T with really strong quantitative skills. So I did like SPSS training again, and I took like a coding class. I wouldn't say that I have great skills in those, but I definitely felt that, like, similar to Andrea, it's great to leverage those technical abilities. I don't think I could safely put some of them on my CV, but that's what I've been up to. And yeah, that's it. That's it for me. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alexandra. And our next speaker is Lindsay Simpson, who has been working as an instructor of sociology and anthropology at Alexandra College. And I know that Lindsay's also been involved in a number of research projects here in Metro Vancouver.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Pam. Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay, and I completed my MA in anthropology at SFU in 2019. And as Pam mentioned, I currently work as a sessional instructor in the Department of Social Science at Alexandra College in Vancouver. I teach a selection of courses, including Introduction to Anthropology, Introduction to Sociology, and Canadian Society. And I began teaching at this college about a year after finishing my thesis, and have been with the college since. Teaching social science courses like Introduction to Anthropology has always been a bit of a passion of mine and a career goal. As Pam also mentioned, I work as a contract researcher on a couple different projects. Over the past year, I've worked as a research consultant with Employment and Social Development Canada on a multi-site ethnographic project aimed at exploring the impact of the CCB, which is the Canada Child Benefit, for low-income, lone mother-led families. This January, I'm also starting my third year on the Vancouver portion of a national study that is following the experience of youth who graduate out of social enterprise-based training programs. And basically, we're evaluating to what extent they can integrate back into the workforce. My work on the latter project actually began during my master's, and because of the study design, my role has continued since graduating. My responsibilities on both these projects are very similar to some of the skills and roles that have been mentioned so far today. It includes developing study instruments such as interview schedules and surveys, administrating various data collection activities, conducting interviews and data analysis, which are all skills I gained from my own ethnographic MA research. Today, I'm going to specifically talk to you about a couple important experiences during my master's that provided the necessary skills to succeed in my current roles today. So during my MA, I held multiple teaching assistantships. These provided the opportunities to lead tutorials, design lesson plans, grade assignments, and invigilate exams. TA-ships also familiarized me with curriculum guides. So as I mentioned, I actually completed my MA in anthropology, yet because of my teaching, TAing experience in sociology, I've been allowed to teach sociology to college students. It also familiarized me with course expectations and learning objectives and various types of assessments and assignments, all of which are really foundational to the skills I rely on as an instructor. During my MA, because I enjoyed teaching so much, in my second year, I completed the Instructional Skills Workshop and the certificate program in University Teaching and Learning offered by the Center of Educational Excellence at the Burnaby campus. The certificate program provided instruction on a variety of topics such as teaching pedagogies, course design, presentation skills, and the development of summative and formative assessment modes. Most importantly, however, the program also taught me how to prepare documents critical to a successful teaching application. So for instance, I was taught what a teaching demo was. I was given an opportunity to practice it and receive constructive feedback. We created sample course syllabi and teaching philosophy statements. So all elements that prior to this program, I had very little information on and didn't really know about. All right, so another important experience during my MA, which contributes to my job as a contract researcher, stems from working as a research assistant on multiple projects, both within and external to the Anthropology and Sociology department. From working on these diverse projects, I've become familiar with a variety of data collection activities, in addition to the methods I used for my own research. This was sort of both an employment decision, but I wanted to broaden my horizons as my research was very specific, and I wanted to gain some skills that could be a bit more broadly applicable. So this better prepared me to work on a variety of projects where applied anthropology can be utilized. Working as an RA provided practical experience in, again, preparing various documents such as ethic amendments, conducting participant recruitment, which has been especially challenging during the pandemic right now. It also prepared me for administrating interviews and other qualitative data collection activities like walk-alongs or photo voice, as well as, of course, conducting data analysis, writing papers, and creating presentations. I will note, however, contract work, whether it's teaching or research, it does afford a lot of schedule flexibility, which enables me to work on multiple projects all at once. And in doing this, I enjoy a lot of diversity in the work that I do. However, while there are benefits of contract work, it can lack some security. So for instance, as a sessional instructor, I'm contracted to teach courses each term with no necessary guarantee that I will be teaching next term. So you have to keep in mind that contract work has a start date and an end date. And with a modest amount of planning and awareness, you can make this work for you. I will also note that I am planning to continue my studies, to continue on to a PhD program. And about this 2-year or almost 3-year gap between my MA and my PhD, I've been able to gain a lot of practical work experience, research experience, and teaching experience, which will strengthen or hopefully strengthen my PhD application. So just to summarize and to sort of sum up here, when reflecting on my experience in the MA program, the most notable skills that I've used as an instructor and contract researcher today stem from additional opportunities such as that teaching, university teaching and learning certificate program, or taking on other RA opportunities available to you while completing your MA. And so while of course I gain valuable knowledge from theory and methods coursework and experience conducting my own thesis research, a lot of the skills I need today in the workforce and to succeed post-graduation as an instructor stem from those additional opportunities I undertook while in my MA. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. And then finally, we will hear from Meagan Simon, who is a sexual violence response coordinator at MacEwan University in Edmonton?
Yes, Edmonton. Well, thank you. So I thought I would start by just explaining a little bit about what I do as sexual violence response coordinator. There are 2 main areas of work. One is primarily focused on support. So I provide frontline immediate support to faculty, staff, and students who have been impacted by sexual violence in a variety of ways: safety planning, access to counseling, supporting people through a complaint process, providing accommodations at the institution. And then I'm also involved in our institutional response to sexual violence, so what the university needs to do about this issue. So that involves participation in training, running a volunteer program, working with different stakeholders across the institution who are involved in overseeing responses to complaints of sexual violence, and working collaboratively with different staff and faculty and providing consultation on appropriate steps they might need to take. I graduated from SFU in 2015 with my BA or MA in sociology. I've primarily focused on research with transgender youth. So I was looking at how trans youth understand gender, understand themselves, and what we can learn about gender through qualitative interviews with young trans people. So not related to the current topic area of my work right now. I agree with people who have mentioned that their success in their careers is shaped by their experience with their MA, but also other aspects of life as well. So for me, before I started my MA, I actually worked at the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton for a couple of years in public education. A lot of my qualifications and experience come from a mix of my educational background, as well as my career experience or workplace experience and volunteer experience. So I've also volunteered for the Student Distress Center and for the Red Cross and a few different organizations. That has certainly in combination led to the development of my skills and expertise. After I graduated with my MA, I, like Alex, I think struggled to find work. The first position that I landed was as a research assistant with the physiotherapy department at the University of Alberta. I think that was very much linked to my experience with the MA. While I was a master's student, I worked with Dr. Travers on a research project. So I worked with Dr. Travers to submit quite extensive SSHRC grant application. And because of that experience that I got this job as a research assistant, supporting faculty members with grant applications. I really struggled in that position. It wasn't fulfilling for me. Like Alex, I went into my master's program thinking that I was going to get a PhD, and then about a month in, I decided I was not going to do that for personal reasons that if you want to ask me about, I can provide more information about that. And so I struggled in a position that was primarily about research, but wasn't, emotionally fulfilling or fulfilling aspects of my personality that really thrive off of personal connection. And of course, there are opportunities to work with people when you're doing research and supporting people with research, but not necessarily in the same way that I was looking for. So I found my way back to work in the area of sexual violence. I worked at the University of Alberta Sexual Assault Center for a few years, and then started working at MacEwan University in my current role in 2018. So that's a little bit about my career trajectory. I wanted to spend some time talking about just what aspects of my master's degree I feel like are relevant to my career success and what I use day to day in my work. One, I feel like having a master's degree, it can get you through the door. So one thing about my position as sexual violence response coordinator, most people in these kinds of roles at different institutions have master's degrees in social work or in psychology or like a counseling field. I am a sort of rare exception in that I don't have that kind of professional, educational background. At the same time, having a master's degree in sociology certainly helped get me through the door, get me to the interview, because a lot of job applications out there look for a range of experience. So, we're looking for somebody with a master's degree in social work, but, sociology also is good if you might also have experience that's relevant to the job. I also think very practically that skills that I developed in my master's degree, I use in my work as well. So for those who've already mentioned, I worked as a teaching assistant while I was doing my graduate degree, and that really sharpened my facilitation skills, and I use facilitation skills quite a bit and public speaking quite a bit in my work. My writing skills definitely improved. Research and having a language to talk about research, even though I'm not actively doing it myself, is very helpful, especially working in a post-secondary environment. During my graduate training, I did take a quantitative research methods course. And so having a balanced understanding of both qualitative and quantitative methods allows me to speak with different faculty members across the institution and sort of be able to speak their language, even if I'm not doing that kind of research like they are. At MacEwan, we recently implemented a climate survey on sexual violence, and I was involved in a subcommittee working on that, and actually led a lot of the processes. So I led the development of a survey instrument. I primarily wrote the final report, and my work as an MA student certainly helped me be able to have the skills necessary to complete that work. And again, doing this collaboratively with people who have way more expertise than me in terms of quantitative research methods, for instance. I think my graduate training also helped me be able to work within a post-secondary environment. I have to work with a wide range of stakeholders at the institution. I work with students, support staff, faculty members, deans, associate deans, chairs. I work with vice presidents and associate vice presidents. So I need to be comfortable working with people in senior leadership positions and not feel intimidated. And when I was doing my graduate work, I certainly went through a range of being highly intimidated by people who have PhDs, and then getting to, okay, people with PhDs are just like me. And, I think, I don't know who was talking about it, there came to this idea that the academy is sort of separate from the rest of life, and to know that these are just, people just like me doing their work really helped with, I think, the imposter syndrome really helped with that. So now I'm able to work with different people at the institution and feel comfortable. Collaboration and coordination skills. As I said, I worked as a research assistant when I was at SFU with Dr. Travers, and a big part of my work there was coordinating with different collaborators on a research project. So being able to communicate with different people, thinking about what communication styles work best for different individuals, how to coordinate, coordinate the labor of different people. So who's responsible for what, whose role is what's the scope of their work on a project. So all of those skills I apply in my work as well, because I do a lot of collaboration at the university. And I'll just say also having an anti-oppressive framework. So my sociological training and research project for my thesis were highly focused on anti-oppressive thinking, trans-feminist thought, looking at intersectional feminism, and I use that in my work as well, whether it's the support work that I'm doing, working with people who have different lived experiences of oppression, and being able to have insight into social location and how that might shape things like disclosing sexual violence and seeking support. And also many post-secondary institutions are concerned with what they might call EDI, like equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And many people, I think, struggle with how to apply that kind of framework in their day-to-day practice or practically. And so I bring my theoretical training in that to my work and have a way to apply it to the work that I'm doing. The other question, so things I wish I knew, I think, yeah, like Alex, I wish I kind of knew that I wasn't going to get a PhD. I'm also somebody who happily falls into things. I think a lot of students can have a plan A or a particular idea of where their life is going to take them. And I'm somebody who, even if I have that plan, like I'm going to get a PhD and become an instructor or get on that 10-year track, I can adapt, and when I realized that that's not for me, I adapted quickly to that. But at the same time, it would have been nice to know going in that I didn't intend to go all the way to a PhD. Yeah, I think I'll stop there for now. I think one of my main things that I always like to say is that thinking about our education in a full context, a holistic context of all the other ways in which we can form networks or develop skills. And I'm a big fan of volunteer work as a supplement to education.
Okay. Thank you, Meagan. That was wonderful. And so I want to turn now to the questions, and we've gotten several questions about the PhD and why or why not, and is there to do a PhD, or does having here's one in terms of private research and consulting work, are there differences between having an MA and a PhD? Or let's see, there's another one about a PhD. What, I mean, do you see that there is any difficulties that might, that are barriers to the work that you want to do by not having pursued a PhD? And, or thinking that or is it, besides Lindsay, is anyone else thinking that they will go back and get a PhD. I guess Meagan says no, and don't know about Andrea or Alex.
I can jump in if you want, Pam.
Okay.
Yeah, I certainly have thought about it. It's still something that's sort of in the back of my mind as something that I might do one day. But this does come up in the evaluation world. So I think traditionally, so for example, in my organization, those with PhDs are the president of the organization and the research director. A lot of the times, at least in the past, the research director for a private firm would have a PhD. And then you have research associates, which is my role, having an MA. And I definitely needed the MA to get that position. I would not have been able to with just an undergraduate degree. So I think in terms of where the field is going, more and more I'm seeing, and because I remember asking this question too when I was just getting into this field, more and more there are opportunities for those at the MA level to move up. It just requires some more time. I think to be able to, I think there is actually sometimes an advantage to not having a PhD in that you can, there's certain positions that are available to you that wouldn't be available to you as a PhD, frankly, because you're too expensive as a PhD. And so being able to gain the experience at an MA level and move up, I think basically you can do it both ways from what I understand. But I don't think that it would really limit you in the evaluation world to not have a PhD. You will see in some positions, like if you're looking at job applications, that they do require the PhD, but they will oftentimes also say, or 5 to 10 years experience, XYZ. And I think that's also because they are, in light of this conversation about equity, trying to make this field more accessible to those that may not have that PhD level, but may have really valuable experience. So that's my kind of quick response. I don't think you can go wrong with having a PhD. It could certainly benefit you, but I think you could also get there at the MA level.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. So I don't, where I'm working currently, there are directors of policy and other ministers' offices. Lots have PhDs and are in different things in health science and in economics. And I think that in policy work, there's always going to be like benefit to having a PhD as a high level of education and that knowledge contribution. And I think it's arguably as a good thing to have. But I don't think it's necessary to be in the world of policy. And for me personally, I think it's grueling to do a thesis. And I think that the isolation and the amount of work and pressure that maybe I put on myself or was just part and parcel of the process, I would not want to do that for a longer period of time. And maybe it's different at different life stages, but I think it's a huge credit to people who contribute to that knowledge production and then go and work in policy and bring that expertise. But I also think it's hard to be out of the labor market and recognizing that many people do a combination of things, but I guess it's the way you approach it. And I think for me personally, I started to panic that I was going to be out of the labor market for a long time. And if I didn't make it to the tenure track, I don't know what would have gone on. And that's very specific to how I was approaching work and policy and my aspirations. So I think could be a benefit, and I don't plan on doing it, but it definitely benefits others.
Maybe I'll jump in just quickly. Yeah, so I think some of this depends on what our goals are. And so again, for my specific work, a PhD would be a detriment because it would be an overqualification. People wouldn't want to, I've been in hiring positions where the hiring committee didn't want to hire somebody with a PhD because they were afraid that they wouldn't stay long, that wasn't actually the job that they wanted, but it was a job that was available to them kind of thing. So it would be a detriment. It all really depends on what your goals are. For me, I was very afraid of job precarity. And even if I thought maybe I might want to be a researcher as my job, which I also learned that that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to have the pressure, like Alex talks about, to produce research and the stress of that. And it wasn't, I realized that wasn't my career aspirations. But I do have, many good friends from my graduate program who have successfully found themselves tenure track positions. So my fears about job precarity, like, it's all just really about what our goals are. And I think if we have specific goals around research, then PhD, we can do it. Also, I got really good advice from somebody in the anthropology department around only do a PhD if you love the work you're doing, if you're willing to quit at any point in time, and if you're funded. I think those were the three things.
All right, thank you. Let's see, we've got a couple of questions about, here's one. Do you feel that the topic or area of your research when you were doing your MA has any way limited the scope of your options after graduation? Anybody feel that and let me combine that with another one that is about convincing people in industry and government about the value of the kind of qualitative research that we teach and we emphasize here at SFU.
I can jump in and speak to that. So my experience post-graduation, I've worked on a variety of research projects, both grounded in qualitative and quantitative research methods. Now, I haven't had that experience where the sort of a dismissive attitude is presented towards qualitative research. And in fact, it's been quite embraced by multiple projects. On projects as well that maybe are quantitative based, so like conducting a national survey using SurveyMonkey, looking at specific data analysis. My input in terms of open-ended questions, and also when our research methods were failing in garnering participant recruitment and actual participation, I found my colleagues and the PI to be very receptive to alternative, what they might consider to be alternative data collection methods like walk-alongs, photo voice, ethnographic interviews, and those turned out to be quite successful and have positively contributed to the research itself. So I haven't had that experience. That being said, whenever I teach my sociology or anthropology research module, I like to ask the students which data collection method do they prefer? Do they prefer qualitative data over quantitative? And it's very interesting. I see a pattern always sort of emerging in terms of a preference towards quantitative data collection, because there still is a bit of a perception that there is more fundamental truth or grounded truth in numbers and statistics. So it has been an interesting opportunity to sort of reteach the value of qualitative data to youth.
Is there anyone else who'd like to jump in on this question?
Was part of the question around showing people that sociology or what you've studied is useful, like outside of that? Because
I think so, yes.
Yeah, okay. I definitely think when I entered the job market, I made it clear, I put something on my CV that said research and policy analyst. And so I helped people by making that connection, because I don't know that people think sociology and think policy. And I made that link very clear, and I would highlight certain parts of my work and research around that was focused on policy. And I think telling people what you have to offer and understanding what they're looking for and making that connection for them is really useful. And then, yeah, I like methods is a huge part of what I ended up doing in my past role as a director of policy for an industry association, being able to apply a framework to research we're conducting and add a legitimacy to it. I found that was really well received. And I think sometimes you have to make the case for yourself and pull out the key components and And in my experience, it's well received when you make those connections for people.
I echo that. I think you just have to be able to talk about how the work you did relates in very tangible ways. So I also on my resume will often put like MA, and then I'll say, either I'll use words like I was talking about before, like community-based participatory research, or I might say, you know, worked with nonprofit and feminist social movement stakeholders, like emphasize who you work with, the kind of skills that you learned, just being able to talk about that. I don't think that, you know, I had a very specific focus, which was working with feminist nonprofits in Bolivia, but being able to apply that to the context I work in now. I mean, nonprofit evaluation is actually an entire field that I could have gone down and might one day, so I could apply it in that sense. But I think just being able to say, here's the skills I learned, here's the methods I used. I did focus groups, I worked in English and Spanish, so those language skills have been actually really huge, especially working in the US, because there's a lot of need for Spanish speaking. So yeah, just being able to talk about the work you do. A lot of people don't know what anthropology is, I find a lot of times. So being able to talk about the field as well, and making those connections, like I saw that with culturally responsive evaluation, being like, I can talk about that. That relates to what I studied. So what are the buzzwords and how does your work tie into those? I think those are huge. And also just being able, because it actually allows you to say, okay, this is a buzzword, but this is also, here's what it actually looks like. Like I think Meagan was getting at this earlier, like what does EDI work actually look like? Because you don't want it to just be something that is something you drop on a resume, like, oh yeah, I'm great with equity work. It's like, okay, where's your like experience that shows that you have really worked on those efforts and understand how this plays out? And so I think one of the previous questions I saw was, is this something you can learn from coursework or doing actual research? And I would highly recommend doing the research and the thesis component. I can't emphasize enough how much those methods that I learned, how important that was to be able to put that on a job application. So anyway, I don't want to tangent too much, but I think as long as you're good at talking about what you did and making it relatable to people, you can get really far.
Thank you. I want to, several of you have mentioned being able to explain your skills. And so we've got some, you know, and one of the reasons I think that, you know, MA students sometimes, you know, often come in imagining they're going to have a PhD is because this is what their professors have. This is what their professors know how to teach them to do, because we don't have that language that translates the academic skills into the language that employers necessarily recognize as they're the skills, but the words are different. And I'm wondering how you learned the words to put on the resume that says, you know, this is what, you know, this is, I do EDI, or I can do program evaluation, or I can, you know, where do you get those words?
I'll jump in, I guess. I mean, that's such an open-ended question. It's like, how far back do I go? I think being able to talk about, you know, you talk about the 3-minute elevator. I don't know what, like the 3-minute, like talking about your thesis in 3 minutes. When I look back at my thesis, it's like, only I could understand what I'm saying, or me and like other people within the sociology, anthropology department could understand. But I'm trying other, you know, people with PhDs in other areas of expertise, and they have no idea what I'm on about. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, it's very jargony, it's very difficult to sift through. And I think for me, then maybe talking about these issues, talking about gender and trans people's experiences and oppression and racism and whiteness with people that are not from within the same field of practice as myself allowed me to find the words that were accessible and translatable to people who don't have the same training that I have, and indoctrination that I have. I think it's a mix of using words that are academic. Like in my CV, I might say I have both quantitative and qualitative training in research methods. I might say that I have experience with report writing and that sort of thing, grant applications. So it's just sort of taking what is the heart of what you are doing and then put that on paper. And then the being able to translate what you know into words that people understand is, just something that you gain from just practice, I suppose. I'm going to stop there. I'm rambling, but anyone else want to jump in?
Okay. All right, maybe not.
I
All
can
right.
say something if you want, but
Okay.
I don't want it to dominate here. I think the way I learned the language was to get involved in my local evaluation association. So this is a lot of, I'm pretty sure Vancouver would have something like this as well, some sort of local chapter where it's just professionals getting together and just listening to the language they learn. So actually, evaluation as a field can also be super jargony. And so, learning what all these big words, fidelity and all these words were, and just being able to ask people in the field was super helpful. And I think it's just a process over time. You learn to incorporate the language, but then if we're thinking about how to then sell your work to potential clients, what we often do actually is break down the word evaluation for them, because evaluation sounds really scary and oftentimes has a negative connotation. It sounds like there's an auditor coming in or someone who wants to, prove what you're doing wrong or something like that. So we try and talk a lot about your successes, your areas for growth. We're here to be a collaborator. So helping people to understand what your role is so that you can move away from that jargon is super helpful. And then if I'm in evaluation circles, listening, asking questions has been super, super helpful for being able to know what to put on the resume.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Andrea and Meagan have said. I also think if the goal is trying to get a job, because I did the things where I'd be like, oh, they want evidence generation strategy and this, and then I would put those on my CV. I also found the most useful way to try and enter a field is sort of, Andrea, as you've highlighted, connecting with people who are in the discipline and in that field that you want to work in, and talking to them and asking them very specific targeted questions and asking them, who else should I talk to? And is there a conference I should be going to? Is there something going on? So if the goal is very specifically coming out of graduate school and trying to enter into a field of work, I think definitely taking cues on how to use the language to explain your skill sets, but also just talking to people and building those relationships. I hated hearing that because I was always oh, I do not have any relationships. So but that is probably still really good advice and is my advice now.
All right. Thank you. So got a number of questions about, and I think we've touched on all areas of this throughout, but about the importance of volunteer work, and I think also other work activities while you're doing your degree, in terms of making connections and building skills. I maybe want to think about the difference between the connections that you make by doing volunteer work or taking on RA jobs or short-term contracts versus the skills. And is there one that's more important? Are they equally important?
I can touch on this a little bit. So I can't speak to volunteer work as much as, say, other opportunities while you're in your MA. But a lot of the time, so I'm recalling with various applications, one of the main requirements is work experience, and they'll list 2 years of teaching or 5 years of teaching. And that's difficult to do while you're in school. But if you take those opportunities to pursue the TA-ship, to do the various programs and certificates. I'm recalling my interview and doing my teaching demonstration and really highlighting the skills as well as the practical skills, the literal know-how of designing a course and what should be on a syllabi and how to select literature. I was able to speak to that during the interview, during the teaching demo as well. So I think the master's program, while there is a lot of pressure, there's a lot of, you have your own research, you have coursework, it's a great time to take those opportunities to get additional certificates. And with the research experience, you know, my own research was very focused on post-secondary education, student identity, but then I worked on these research projects that were in different departments, had very different focuses, and basically rounded out what I could bring to the table on different projects.
Anybody else have something to add?
I guess I could add to that. I think it's you know, it's a mix of both, right? Connections that we form with people and the skills that we develop. I think relationships are very important, and I still have a relationship with my first, you know, employer at the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton, where every time I see my previous employer, she's like, when can we hire you next, kind of thing. And that is just so helpful to have when you're going to continue to go back to that person as a reference or as a network. And she's a big part of my current network and my career here in Edmonton. So I think relationships can be very important. And for me, it's the skills as well, the practical skills that you gain. And then the third thing is just, I was trying to think of words to talk about this, but I think sometimes when you're in a graduate program or any other kind of similar environment, the groupthink can start to happen. And it's a way to get your mind and your body outside of that environment to then gain multiple perspectives. And I think that's just about like life. And I have a personal, what word am I looking for again? Like, I think graduate school can be very hard on our mental health. And so I think kind of having a holistic way of living through that can be very helpful for the mental health side of things.
All right. Let's see here. Like I said, I think we've touched on aspects of all of the questions. I wonder if we could talk about, I mean, somebody would like to talk about, do you use the I guess it's probably the zeitgeist of anthropology or sociology, the way of being an anthropologist or being a sociologist in your work? Or, I mean, is it a bundle of skills, or is it a way of approaching the world? And then how do you articulate that and the value? I mean, I could, from my own life, I could see, remember the uncle saying to me, anthropology, what are you going to do with that? Do you get that kind of question from employers?
Well, as a fellow anthropologist, I might not be able to speak to this too well, because I do teach anthropology. So there's quite a literal translation, but I do remember family members in my undergrad. In my undergrad, I knew I really wanted to do anthropology, and there was sort of that bigger question of like, what on earth are you going to do? And so I think you do have these bundles of skills, you have a bundle of skills. I think it is a mindset you approach. I know I approach my own life thinking very holistically, thinking about all the social constructs that I engage with on a daily basis. So it definitely has shaped my everyday life as well as my work life. Maybe someone else can speak a little bit better to that. Okay. Yeah.
Right. Okay, sure, Meagan.
I could go. Yeah, I just didn't want to dominate too much, but no, I agree. I think I carry the sociological imagination with me everywhere, And it's a big part of who I am as a person and how I am in this world. And like you can break it down into the skills and the practical. And so when you're with an employer, like I've been with an employer and been able to really break it down. Again, my area is sexual violence. And so one question I was asked was like, you know, what is my understanding of intersectional feminism and how to apply that in my work? And so I could be very eloquent if I'm speaking fondly of myself or highly of myself. Like I could articulate that on both a quantitative level and a qualitative level by talking about disproportionate rates of sexual violence and these, you know, inequalities socially like that, or people's lived experience of oppression and how that shapes qualitatively their experience of sexual violence and recovery and support and community and that sort of thing. So it's something that I carry with me always. Again, in terms of relationship building, I'll often be in conversations with students, for instance, who might be sociology majors, and then I'll be able to throw out sociological terms and then connect with them on a relational level that way. And so I just think there's so many nuances to how we can bring this kind of theoretical framework learning environment into our world and the lives that we live that don't break down into the tangibles. But then unfortunately we do have to break it down into the tangibles when we're putting something on a CV or in a job interview.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. And then I think we'll make this the last question because I think the others, they're all sort of similar. And this is something I hear from talking to former students a lot. In terms of, you know, several of you mentioned the difficulty of moving immediately into the kind of secure employment that you were looking for, and to trying out a few things and making some steps along the way. So the question is, what did the job market look like when you graduated? And what kind of hurdles did you have to navigate to secure the careers that you have now?
I can speak to that. I definitely didn't land in this position right away. I always feel like I sort of stumbled into evaluation because I came out of my MA and I was like, I love research, but I don't want to do the PhD. What am I going to do? So I actually ended up going back to a government employer here in Portland that I'd worked for before, and this evaluation position came up. The way that I ended up in the position I am now is, I mean, I sound kind of like I'm repeating myself, but I can't emphasize networking enough. I just showed up at local evaluation events and said, I'm new to evaluation, I want to learn more. I talked to people. That's how I met my current employer, and they took me on as a contractor, which then eventually turned into a full-time position. So, and even when I was in government, I worked a part-time position for some time while I was finishing out my thesis, and then eventually moved into this full-time position. So it definitely takes, I think, steps. It takes networking. It takes, that first evaluation job I did was not my favorite job. It wasn't as fulfilling. I was doing a lot more internal research, so helping this government agency understand how the work they were doing internally. And I found that I really like doing the external work where I get to work with all kinds of different clients, whether it's libraries, community colleges, early learning hubs, like all kinds of stuff. So I think it's just important to try out different things and see what it is you like, but that might mean taking an opportunity that isn't a perfect fit, but that then is a stepping stone to the future. And I think the job market, I mean, it looked, in terms of what it looked like, I think relating back to the last question, I did have to ask myself that question of how can I sort of sell my anthro degree. So I just talked up my research a lot, like what I'd done in Bolivia, the work I'd done there, just trying to make that relatable to the people I was talking to. Having that research component of my MA was really, really important. And being able to say that I spoke Spanish as well was also really helpful for jobs. So that's my.
Okay. Anybody else? Lindsay or Megan? I know that Alexandra had to go to work.
Well, I'll just jump in. So as I mentioned, I am interested in doing my PhD and I'm preparing applications for what hopefully will be a 2021 start date. I've always wanted to do my PhD, and after conducting my research, which focused on student subjectivity and identity, I still wanted to. However, I had some really great advice from Pam, who was my supervisor, about taking some time off, getting some work experience, diversifying my research skills, and in a year or two, if I still wanted to, go ahead. Just following the advice of those social networks you have, and really kind of thinking about what you actually want to do with the skills you have. I know I initially wanted to follow that linear trajectory of BA, MA, PhD, and follow to that really strict regimen that I thought was my only option. But by taking that break and getting some perspective, I've been able to kind of diversify my interests and my research areas. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll just share something very quickly. I found the job market a challenge. Again, I'm like a fear-based person. Fear motivates a lot of my choices in life, and I was afraid of not finding work, and so I applied for like anything that potentially I could do. I just I need a job, so let me get a job. And so I did get a lot of interviews that were relevant to my training in the MA. I got an interview to do institutional strategic analysis and planning, which I was so underqualified for. An interview to do a research project, do a trans community of practice project, which was related to the focus of my research. So it was just about which position I landed first. It was a challenging job market, but I persevered, and I know that the current job market is going to be very challenging for many of us who are looking for different positions. So it's just about perseverance, identifying I think Andrea talking about this, very well, about identifying how do I tell my story in a way that is going to resonate with this potential employer.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful, thank you. So what I've been hearing, and you can all jump in and tell me I'm right or wrong, is that doing the research for your MA was beneficial, that it gave you some confidence, it introduced you to a particular way of thinking about the world and problem solving, but that taking advantage of other opportunities, both at the university and outside the university, taking on some volunteer work, taking advantage of other skills training within the university, like the teaching certificate. The university also offers public speaking training and things like that. Did anybody do the 3-minute thesis contest? I heard that come up. Did you do that, Meagan?
No, but I should have.
Okay. Because we do have students who do it, and we've had a couple who placed highly. And then taking on job opportunities, of being flexible, of looking to opportunities when, being open to the possibility that opportunities come from strange places and unexpected places, seems to be a summary of what I've heard. Okay. Is there anybody who'd like to add anything else, or anybody who feels like they didn't get their question answered, wants to very quickly add something to the question box?
What you were saying, Pam, reminded me of something that I think was so important to doing the research component, and that was learning to deal with the ambiguity. My research did not go as planned. Part of it was the context I was working in, but just being able to go with it, and as someone who can be very type A and has a plan, and this is how I'm going to execute this plan, and learning that I just needed to go with it. Sometimes my interviewees wouldn't show up. Sometimes I would get pulled into like, oh, do you want to go like listen to this meeting of this different social movement thing? And it was totally not on my plan, but it was like the perfect opportunity. And just being able to like jump in and say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to just go with it. That has been so helpful. I think because even now the research that we do doesn't always go the way that we plan it. And I think it's most successful when we can pivot, especially in light of COVID. There's been so many places where it's like, well, the research questions we were asking don't make a whole lot of sense because the education world has entirely changed. So now we need to talk about virtual learning and online assessments and that kind of thing. So I remember talking to Dr. Kathleen Millar, who was my supervisor, about that one day, just saying, nothing's going as planned. And she said, that sounds exactly like what ethnography is. Like that's you're right on target because nothing's going the way you thought it would. And so I highly recommend it just for that lesson.
Okay, well, wonderful. All right, well, in that case, I would like to thank our panelists for being so generous with their time and for sharing a little bit about their lives and their work with us. And I would like to remind people that this presentation will be available to them within the next few weeks if you want to watch it again. And thank you very much for all of you. Alexandra, Lindsay, Andrea, and Megan, thank you for spending this morning with us.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.